previously on Popping Collars.
That is sort of what I think of like allowing yourself to play with the dark side in that way and get a little payoff from it. I mean, that definitely sounds like sin to me. And, flirting with sinfulness or with evil or however you want to put it in a very real way. And that's tempting for all of us. Like I would love to read the screw tape letters for the modern man. What role does the devil play on the internet? Probably, a pretty big one.
That's all right.
All right.
Welcome to Popping Collars, the podcast that lives at the intersection between religion and pop culture. The show where priests, pastors, ministers, and religious thinkers from around the country weigh in on what people are binge watching, tweeting about, trolling on message boards, and celebrating on blogs. My name is Greg Knight. I am in Palm Beach, Florida, and I am your host of this roundtable conversation with our guests, who this week include two newcomers to the program. Very exciting. Eric Metoyer from San Francisco, California. Hello, Eric.
Hello there, everyone.
And Edwin Johnson from Dorchester, Mass. Hello, Edwin.
What's going on, Greg? What's going on, peeps?
Great to have you guys. This is episode 18 of Popping Collars, and our topic today is The Wire. So this is a show that came along right in the middle of all of those great HBO shows of the mid-aughts. And while it never really achieved the notoriety of The Sopranos or 6 Feet Under, it's generally considered to be one of the most important shows of all time. It's the story of the drug trade in Baltimore, Maryland, as told from the perspective of the dealers and the cops trying to bust them. But probably more interestingly, it spends a lot of time on the characters that live on the periphery of these worlds. The dope fiends, bureaucrats, social workers, corner boys, and a host of others who profit from or are destroyed by the drug game. So a question to get us started. Who are the characters, or who are the groups of characters on the fringes of this world that stood out to you? And what is it about them that catches your eye?
Two sets of people really struck me. Recognize that this is a story arc that starts with the drug trade, goes through in 5 seasons. It goes through the collapse of the American manufacturing industry. They look at it through the port of Baltimore, but all the things that used to come in and out of the port. Steel, sugar, train cars, and so on, and how the port became a place for just only bringing in products from overseas. It looked at the politics of 2 seasons on looking at the politics of the city, 1 season on the education system of the city, and 1 on the media, and how the media stopped being investigative and became all a story of what's going to be the infotainment that will strike us for the story of the day. So with that background, I really appreciate how it started out looking at 4 teenagers, and eventually towards the end, how many of them were left and what they tried to do. There's 1 that tried to leave. There were 3 that continued to play into, they called it the game, living the society of selling drugs, buying drugs, hustling, basic street hustling just to survive and get away. But 1 broke out, 1 died, 2 stayed in it. And then also, for me, probably one of the hardest stories for me to view was an old-time street reporter for the Baltimore Sun who saw a Pulitzer Prize go to a guy who completely made up a story about the game. He even found the guy's notebook and it had no notes in it and showed it to his editors. And the last scene is the guy who made up the story getting a Pulitzer Prize because the story is so compelling. But there was no story behind it. He made it up.
Right.
And I appreciated that because it just sort of went through the 2 cycles of what it was like to be in the city and what were the things that were important. One was survival of the 4 teenage boys, but the other was that one lone voice of truth trying to speak out against essentially falsehoods and misrepresentation, and seeing that falsehood and misrepresentation was what we wanted to reward.
There's this narrative that people want to believe about Baltimore,
right,
and about the drug trade. And the term that they kept using during that last season is, we want to show the Dickensian aspects of Baltimore, right? We want to basically just like, look at these poor people, look at them. Oh, that's really sad, right? And now let's get on with our lives. The manipulative part of that, and it all fed this kind of privileged narrative of, oh, well, God, thank God that's not my world.
Yeah.
That is your world. That's your city, right? And I think that's what it was trying to point out.
That's exactly it. And yet with the kids, as the kids grew older, and one escaped and the other, and some didn't, some did, at the very last scene, you're seeing another 8-year-old getting arrested for popping somebody. So it just, the cycle continued on.
But it's this idea that your roles are already prescribed for you, right? That you can't break out of this system because you are born into it, right? That you are born into this world of being a corner boy. And for you to get out of that world means that you have to violate every single piece of your programming to kind of remove yourself from this that you're kind of stuck in. To see kids without a choice, right, or with no agency, that's heartbreaking. But for me, the people that stood out were not surprisingly, kind of the religious people that exist in this world, the recovery people. For them, because there's an AA group that's on the show that acts as, because there's a character that goes through recovery and redemption, and his arc is being a dope fiend at the beginning. He's in recovery by the end, and he's cleaned up his life to the point that he's reconciled relationships that he broke, that he fractured. And there's this moment during the course of the show where they try to segregate the drug trade to one particular neighborhood. It's like a bunch of abandoned buildings, a bunch of abandoned row houses on this one street. And so they move all of the drug trade down on this street, and the cops say, you can trade all the drugs you want to down here, you can sell all the drugs you want to, and we won't arrest anybody. Like, you can just do whatever you want to on that street, just keep it to that street, and we won't arrest anybody. And at one point, the word gets out that the cops have done this, and these social workers go down to pass out clean needles and get people medical care and stuff like that. And one of them is a deacon. He goes to the major who set up this whole scenario of like turning a blind eye to the drug trade in Baltimore. And he says, you've created hell. Like you, I know what you think you're doing. I know you think you're trying to help, and you've created hell here in the middle of the city. And that was always really powerful to me. Like this idea of you have these cops who are trying to achieve their goal of stopping the drug trade, right? Or at least slowing down the number of homicides or, arrests that they're making, getting key arrests, that kind of thing. And you have the drug dealers who are trying to do their thing. And in the middle of all this stuff, you have these people who are trying to just mend together as best they can a fractured society, And I feel like that's where we find ourselves a lot of the times, is in the middle of these two worlds, trying to say, guys, we're creating hell here. Well, there's got to be a way that we can stop falling into these traps, falling into these sin traps.
I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that you see happening when people just don't have faith or a real sense that things are going to be okay, that they're going to be able to go somewhere. Thinking back to the question that you posed, what one scene that really sticks out for me is, listening to early on in the show, listening to the Barksdale crew, talking about, chicken nuggets and how, ideas don't get you anywhere. And for me, I mean, it was a scene that just captured just how much cynicism there was. One thing I appreciated about it was the fact that kids weren't just cast off as, completely careless thugs. And so I appreciated that side of it. And then it also made me sad because it became so clear to me how this cynicism, this lack of hope, had just so gotten into them that, you know, they really felt no need to try to make really, really different choices, you know, and I think that's something that I think really sticks out to me because, I mean, I hear that stuff all the time. I mean, I hear folks talking about how, you know, their ideas aren't going to get them anywhere all the time because of this and that, you know, and so I feel like whenever people are in those kind of situations, you say, okay, I'm going to hold on to what I can hold on to and exert power where I can exert power, and then, you know, let everything else sort of fall where it is because everybody's just looking for theirs anyway.
And then I went to the last episode where it just showed, sort of like wrapped up all the storylines. And one of them was Marlowe leaving this 20th floor, overseeing the harbor. He's been plea bargained out of jail. You know, through various shenanigans, he's plea bargained. They're trying to turn him into the next Avon Barksdale of being involved in property in buying and selling property in the city and so on. And he leaves the party to do what? Single-handedly steal a corner from a couple of corner boys. And he gets knifed in the process, but a couple of shots ring out and so on, and he's got the corner. And then he starts smiling and realizing nothing's changed. The next scene is Bunk and Sonia Hine going through a murder scene in the projects. Nothing's changed. Then it just goes into little clips like that and realizing, yeah, this is it. We're not stopping it, but we're still admitting our culpability by not doing something to make the change. Yeah. It's fascinating. And where I've run it because I've had 2 anti-racism classes this month. One the full one, and then we've specially designed one for a parish to be in a short form, was running into it and saying, yes, we're good progressive Christians, but as much as we might start recognizing our culpability in climate change, how many of you have Priuses, Accord hybrids, etc.? How many of you have Teslas? Okay, you accept that role of burning coal, burning fossil fuel in the world. Now, how many of you have reached out across lines to invite people into your church or invite people into your social set? Smaller number of hands. This is where we're not living into all are welcome at the table. This is our culpability.
You know, I went to Tufts University in Massachusetts, and you know, there's a young man who was there from a poor neighborhood in Florida, and things happened in his family, and eventually he chose to leave Tufts, even though he was the first person in his family to go to college, to, you know, go take care of what was going on with his family. You know, to this day, he still hasn't finished his degree. I think it was a noble choice on his part for sure. And I think it's also an example how, you know, even for someone with tons of promise, you know, tons of intellect and a great heart, that, you know, where we come from can determine how far we go or how far we get, you know, from our starting place in a lot of ways. You know, I was first introduced to The Wire by some kids at the previous parish I was working at who just loved the fact that it was so real. And so they would talk about it all the time. And I think that what they loved about it was just how it sort of named and put in picture, I think, a reality that they felt. You know, that sort of being stuck piece is a huge part of it.
So the Wire was really the show that I think introduced a lot of people to Idris Elba.
Yeah.
As an actor, right? And Stringer Bell's arc could really be one-dimensional, except for the fact that you see him going to college and, you know, starting to get into real estate and doing all of these things. And you can actually see it in the cops because McNulty is like trailing him and like piecing together his life and stuff. And he's like, wait a second.
Yeah.
This guy's supposed to be a drug dealer. He's supposed to be a thug, right? That's the word that we like. He's supposed to fit into this box, and this guy is not fitting into the box that I want him to. Omar, of course, is the huge one with that because, like, if you're ever watching The Wire with someone for the first time, and Omar comes on, and they're like, "Oh my God, Omar, this guy's awesome, really cool," and then the first time he kisses his boyfriend, people are like, what? Yeah. Like, that's the stick-up guy? It's like, yeah, that's the stick-up guy. And it's one of those that it's a piece of his character, and it's not his whole character. His whole character isn't that he's this stick-up artist. His whole character isn't that he's a gay man living in this, in this world. It's all of it makes Omar who Omar is. And that's the lovely piece, is not being able to fall back on your old prejudices of who these characters are based on what you've seen from other media coming into the show. The show does this great job of really, it does get you into this real world with authentic characters and stuff like that. But one of the things I really love about it is that you get no sense that there's an end. Like Eric talked about this earlier. There's no sense that, like, well, for instance, one of the characters says at one point, talking about busting one of the big drug dealers towards the end of the show, one of the detectives says, this job isn't going to save you. You're going to bust this guy, but it's not like he's going to stay in jail. And it's not like there's not going to be another drug dealer who's going to come down the line. And it's not like you're not going to get frustrated with your bosses again. And, you're just going to keep going down this same cycle over and over again. And there's a cynical piece to that, which I think that you hit on, Edwin. But there's also, for me, that's the very definition of sin, right? It's this idea that we keep falling into the same cycles over and over and over again.
Just to say a little bit about St. Mary's, I mean, the neighborhood of Dorchester is it's the largest residential neighborhood of Boston, and it's also has a fair amount of crime. And one thing that I see, happening again and again, both within my congregation and around it, are people who, are constantly stuck in these cycles. For some, it's, around addiction. For others, it's around, getting involved with crime and everything like that. And with this real sense that, okay, I'll get myself out this time. I won't do it this time. And then, they kind of go right back and right back and right back. And so I think the challenging thing for me is to, continue to help people feel motivated to make a sincere attempts at getting out. And, whether it's moving away from the drugs or moving away from selling the drugs or whatever it is that's going on, while also somehow explaining to them that, part and parcel of our reality in this fallen world is that, we are likely to mess up again, and that we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it to the point where it makes us not want to try anymore. I think it's sort of playing that balance where, on the one hand, trying to lift up this message of light and hope and, trying to get people fired up to do something with their lives. And on the other hand, trying to give them a bit of a safety net so that they don't just give up totally when they mess up, not if they mess up, but when they do, because, we all do. Exactly.
And that God's ready to catch us and hold us. We are in that place. Sin is around us. Sin is within us. Not only from the time we left the garden, but we also saw how salvation through Christ will bring us out of it. And yet sin is not sin, but our separation of ourselves from God. And when we fall into these cycles, the cycles that have us repeating the errors of our ways, when we're told to turn away, we're told to break those cycles, but we get stuck in them. And what I'm hearing, I really appreciate this part of the conversation, and what I saw in the show was that there are times you just can't break the cycles, but every now and then there's someone who's able to break that cycle and maybe go into some form of redemption. What is encouraging is that through Christ we can come to that place where we can break those cycles, but not to be fooled that it's going to be easy. I think the real redemption was looking at Bugs, who was 5 seasons. For 5 seasons, 4 of those seasons, he is redeems himself. He becomes a confidential informant. He gets some money, and then he slides back in. He's doing drugs. One of the more heartbreaking scenes I remember is when he goes to, I think it's his sister's house, and she won't even let her daughter, his niece, talk to him because you can see it in the pain of her eyes. And for those who have dealt with, lived with people in addiction, they know it of, I love you, you're my brother, you're my cousin, you're my mom, you're my dad, you're my son, you're my daughter, but I can't have you lie and steal from me anymore. Mm-hmm. Just in that 2 seconds, you saw that in her face. And he's trying to at the same time say, I'm stopped, I'm not going to do this anymore. And yet, how many times has that person heard that? How many times have we heard that? Mm-hmm. But the redemption is there if he's able to break that cycle. And in this case, he's one of the few people that actually is able to break that cycle.
And this is where I was going with the whole sin thing, because I think we've done this great thing in the church of saying that sin is something that you've done, right? It's this sort of, I did something against my neighbor, and therefore I need to confess it because I committed a sin. And yet the Bible seems to be pretty clear that sin is something that you exist in, you may do some horrible action against your neighbor, but even if you lived a perfect life, you still exist in a state of sin. It's just, it's because you're part of it. It's because you're part of this human history that you've inherited this, in a way.
That's a great conversation, because in some ways we look at that as, since we were separated from God in the fall, and to push it even further, that we had to leave the garden, and then we've lost the knowledge of God and knowledge of goodness, and even though with salvation through Christ, we're still not there yet. What Christ has shown us is that we can come back, and we have a way back, but we still exist in that state, and that is a post-colonial way. That's exactly what colonialization and where white privilege fall in. Which is, it didn't exist until I named it, and because I wasn't there, therefore it's not my fault.
Right.
So and I brought this up because someone was asking me about the doctrine of discovery and why is this important to the church, because we shouldn't get involved. And it was just, and explaining, well, the doctrine of discovery says X because this is what we're taught, and it says we need to know the whole story, and the whole story includes that the native peoples, the indigenous peoples, lost their land because it was stolen, cheated, or sold by them in an unequal system where it seemed, no matter how you can say it seemed like they had the power, they never had the power. They were decimated by the diseases that came. They were told that the Europeans brought civilization and religion to them, but it wasn't ours, therefore we find it as not acceptable, and they had to accept ours. And then it felt back, then the response is, but that was back then, I have nothing to do with it. Well, the privilege says that you get to make that conversation. Privilege says you can stand back and say, it's not my problem. But the reality is, if it was on the flip side, and you're living on destroyed civilization, lost lands, yes, it may not be my generation, but I'm suffering from the faults of 4 or 5 generations before. That's a privileged argument.
I think that what we're trying to say is that to break the cycle of sin means to be actively working against those pieces of injustice that are in our society, right? Those things, those walls that we've built to separate ourselves from other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think we can't be silent. I think that's a huge challenge, which is sometimes our sin is our silence. It becomes a quiet acquiescence of all that is wrong around us, and that we see it and we don't act. We're like in the parable of the Good Samaritan, we're those priests, we're those temple leaders that walk by. There's a good reason for them to walk by, because they've already been purified. If they touch the man bleeding on the side of the road, they become impure again, and he's not one of them. So they can walk by and they can be perfectly justified. But for us, I think what we've seen through following the steps of Christ is that we have to get involved. We have to become the Samaritan. We have to be willing to risk risk whatever it takes to be risked to right the wrong that's before us. And I think that's what encouraged me when seeing the photos coming out of Baltimore, of seeing blacks and whites marching together, protesting police brutality, where there were people who saw that it's not just one community's problem, it's all of our problems, that this is happening before us, and we can no longer be silent anymore.
And I think that this is a place where, I've seen many people who aren't connected to communities of faith really galvanize those of us who are part of communities of faith. I think, I took part in a protest that happened in Boston in solidarity with Baltimore a couple weeks ago. And, what's interesting, at these protests, you have tons of people who aren't connected to any community of faith at all, who have just gotten so fed up that while a large part of them might not have much hope in change happening, they're just so fed up that they're just going to make their statements anyway. And for, many of us in the church to sort of see that and to have them so active and so on fire about it, in some ways I think it's really gotten us, off our behind so that we could get after it ourselves and, do so coming from the standpoint of people who do actually have hope, in part because of, or really not in part, but in whole, because of, our faith in Christ and our faith in the resurrection. But I think at least here, it took, tons of just individuals and humanist groups, kind of leading the way and, saying to us, well, if you're not here, then what are you doing? And,
right.
And so we're finally starting to show up to that. And I think in a really big way, it's interesting because, I was talking to one of my parishioners and, for a lot of my parishioners, this idea of being in exile or of being sort of caught up in a place or a system that isn't your own and where you're really never going to get anywhere is something that's really powerful, in part because it's a largely immigrant community, in part because it's a largely black and brown community. But, it's, one thing that I told him just on Sunday is, think about what Jeremiah said that, fine, you might be in Babylon, you might be in this place that stinks that you don't feel as home. And, there's still a call to seek the welfare of that place. There's still a call to plant gardens, build houses to make it as good as you possibly can. And that maybe that's it. Maybe, I think sometimes, we want people to just say, what, this place is perfect, this place is home. Whereas for me, I think the important thing is that people can feel like they have the agency and the power to contribute something positive, even if at the end of the day they still feel like they're somewhere where they don't necessarily want to be.
There's this quote that's on the show that reminds me of that Lester Freeman says, where he says, "All the pieces matter." I've always thought about that mm-hmm. when it comes to what it is that we do, mm-hmm. because without our piece, something's missing. However it is that breaks down, all the pieces matter, and for that hope, for that real change to actually take effect, it requires all of our pieces. Baltimore, that's like the perfect city to set the show. Charm city, man. That's what we're trying to strive for, I think. It's like this idea of we are imperfect, but damn it, we're charming.
Oh, yeah.
Don't be afraid to smile. Life's too short to frown so much. Look a brother in the eyes. Ain't no need to act so tough. Don't be afraid to smile. Life's too short to frown so much. Yeah. Look a brother in the eyes. Ain't no need to act so tough. Where my people at? Beat freakers and heat seekers, revolutionary leaders, street sweepers and peacekeepers, deep thinkers, liquid with similar beasts of burden, carrying knowledge like apple trees carry serpent seeds, chariots of fire carry various desires that tear open my eyes like flares up in the night skies. Finally aware of my position in these times to be a beacon of light, keeping the feeling alive. All day, every damn day, too much work and not enough play. All day, in a pattern to manage the dismay.
It's time for our Go in Pieces segment. So this is the opportunity for us to let people know how they can get in touch with us and tell people how we can get in touch with them. So, Edwin, where are you? What are you doing? And how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So once again, I'm up in Boston living the dream, and you can get in touch with me in a couple of different ways. My Twitter handle is Padre Edwin, just Padre Edwin, PADREEDWIN. So you can check me out there. That'll be on fire and active, especially during General Convention. So that's good. My email is padreedwinj@gmail.com. So you can hit me up there. And you can know more about what's going on with St. Mary's at our website, www.stmarys, M-A-R-Y-S, Dorchester, DORCHESTER.org. Check that out, and you can hear what's going on with us. And please follow me and connect with me on Facebook as well. One warning, my Facebook account tends to have lots of pictures of me dancing with people with various levels of dress and undress, but nothing sketchy is going on. I'm just a dancer on the side. So,
Eric, where are you? What are you doing? How can people get in touch with you?
How sweet it is. So, first off, I'm going to put in my standard disclaimer. All views expressed this evening are my personal views and the views only of me. I work for the Episcopal Diocese of California. You can reach me at ericm@diocal.org. www.diocal.org. I'm giving a shout out to our newest congregation, our bilingual Spanish congregation, Our Lady of Guadalupe, which meets 1 p.m. Sundays at Van Ness and Clay Streets on San Francisco at St. Luke's Episcopal Church. And this is where I live. Beautiful, San Francisco, California. I was about to say, I forgot. I had to look up my Twitter account because I never knew it. At Rev E Met. That is me. REVEMET.
Awesome.
indeed.
My name is Greg Knight. I am the Director of Children and Youth Ministries at Bethesda by the Sea Episcopal Church in Palm Beach, Florida. You can find us on the web at bbts.org. You can find me on Twitter at @ThatGregKnight. Popping Collars is all over the place. You can follow us on Twitter at Popping Collars. You can friend us or like us on Facebook. We like friends and we like likes. So you can find us at both places there. You can find us on Instagram, Popping Collars Podcast. You can also find us on our website, poppingcollarspodcast.com. The show is wherever you find your... Finally, a big shout out to the folks at Episcopal Cafe who feature our podcast every single time. Please check out their site, episcopalcafe.com. They have wonderful articles, and especially heading into General Convention, you're going to want to keep track of what's going on, and they're going to be a good source of information for you. So, and with that, that is Popping Collars for the week. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Eric, for being with us. Keep those collars popped. We'll see you next time.
Have a good one.
Peace out.
Woo!